The stagecoach rattled to a halt outside the Red Canyon Saloon, just as the sun painted the Arizona sky blood orange, and Alina Hartwell stepped down into the dust with nothing but a carpetbag, a loaded Derringer hidden in her bodice, and the desperate hope that no one in this god-forsaken town of Copper Springs would recognize her face from the wanted posters 200 miles east. It was August of 1878, and the heat pressed down like a physical weight as Alina smoothed her travel-worn skirts and surveyed the rough collection of buildings that made up this frontier settlement. She had been running for 3 weeks now, ever since she had pulled the trigger on Marcus Thornton in that Denver hotel room, the man who had called himself her protector, while his fists taught her what true terror felt like. Self-defense would not matter to a judge, not when Marcus had been a respected banker, and she was nothing but a woman alone in the world. So she had run, changing her name at every stop, always moving westward where the law was thinner and a woman might disappear into the vast spaces between civilization. The saloon doors swung open and a man emerged, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore dusty chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. A gun belt sat low on his hips, but there was something about the way he moved, unhurried and careful, that made her think he was not the type to draw unless absolutely necessary. He glanced at her briefly, touched the brim of his hat in a polite gesture, and walked past toward the livery stable. Alina found herself watching him go, struck by the quiet courtesy of that simple acknowledgement. In her experience, men either looked at women like Marcus had with that possessive hunger that made her skin crawl, or they did not see women at all. This stranger had simply treated her like a human being, nothing more and nothing less. She took a room at the boarding house run by a weathered widow named Mrs. Fletcher, paying for a week in advance with coins that represented a significant portion of her remaining funds. The room was sparse but clean, with a window overlooking the main street and a lock on the door that actually worked. Alina tested the lock 3 times before she allowed herself to believe it might hold. That first night she lay awake listening to every sound, her hand wrapped around the Derringer under her pillow. The voices from the saloon carried on the night air, rough laughter and the tinny sound of a badly tuned piano. Somewhere a dog barked, a horse whinnied in the livery. She catalogued each noise, sorting threats from harmless sounds, and did not sleep until dawn began to pale the eastern sky. In the morning, Alina went looking for work. Copper Springs was a mining town, swollen with men seeking silver in the nearby hills, and everywhere she looked she saw eyes that lingered too long and reminded her why she had learned to shoot. The general store did not need help. The restaurant had just hired someone. The seamstress took one look at Alina's fine hands and city-bought dress, and said she could not afford to pay what someone like her would expect. Alina was standing on the wooden sidewalk outside the assayer's office, trying to figure out her next move, when a commotion erupted from the direction of the livery stable. She turned to see a massive bay horse rearing and plunging, scattering men in all directions. The animal was magnificent and terrified, whites showing around its eyes as it fought against the rope someone had foolishly attached to a post. The man from yesterday, the quiet cowboy, appeared from the stable's shadowed interior. He did not run or shout. Instead, he approached the panicked horse with slow, steady steps, talking in a low voice that Alina could not make out over the distance and the noise. She watched, fascinated, as he reached up to grasp the rope, not pulling but simply holding, still talking in that same calm tone. It took perhaps 5 minutes, though it felt longer. Gradually, the horse's plunging slowed, then stopped. Its ears swiveled forward, listening to whatever the cowboy was saying. Finally, it lowered its head and allowed him to approach close enough to stroke its neck. The watching crowd dispersed, disappointed that there would be no violent spectacle to entertain them. Alina found herself walking toward the livery, drawn by something she could not quite name. The cowboy was still with the horse, running his hands over its legs, checking for injuries. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30 years old, with a face that spoke of long days under the sun and a quiet strength that had nothing to do with violence. He glanced up as her shadow fell across him, those creekwater eyes meeting hers with a directness that should have frightened her but somehow did not. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice matched what she had imagined, low and unhurried, with the slight drawl of someone who had grown up in Texas or perhaps New Mexico. Alina realized she had approached without any plan and now stood there feeling foolish. "I was just watching," she said, then added because it was true. "That was remarkable, the way you calmed him." The cowboy straightened, pulling off his hat to wipe his brow with his sleeve. His hair was dark brown, overdue for a cut, and curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Fear makes creatures do things they would not normally do. The trick is showing them they do not need to be afraid." Something in his words resonated in Alina's chest, though she could not have explained why. "Does it always work?" "No," he admitted. "Sometimes the fear is too deep, too old. But you have to try anyway." He studied her for a moment, not in the way that made her want to reach for her derringer, but as if he was simply curious. "You are new to Copper Springs. Looking for work?" Alina nodded, surprised by his perceptiveness. The positions seemed to be limited for women. "Can you keep books, handle accounts and such?" Yes. It was one of the few useful skills her education had provided. Her father had been a minister, and he had believed in educating his daughters, at least until the fever took him and her mother in the same winter and left Alina alone at 19 with no family and no protection. The owner of the Big Sky Ranch has been complaining about needing someone to manage the accounts and handle correspondence. He is not much for reading and writing, and his foreman has even less patience for it. The ranch is about 6 miles out of town. Work would be 5 days a week, room and board provided if you want it, or they would pay extra if you prefer to keep your room in town. Alina's heart was beating faster. A legitimate job, one that would use her skills and provide income. But 6 miles from town, surrounded by ranch hands, isolated and vulnerable. The fear rose up sharp and familiar. The cowboy must have seen something in her face because his expression softened. "The owner is a man named Samuel Garrett. He is in his 60s, honest, treats his workers fair. His foreman is Hector Morales, married with 4 children. The hands are a mixed bunch, but Garrett does not tolerate troublemakers. He fired 2 men last month for getting drunk and starting a fight." He paused, then added quietly, "It is as safe a place as you are likely to find in this territory." "You work there?" Alina asked. "I do. Been with Garrett for 3 years now. Name is Cole Bennett." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Alina took it. His grip was firm but not crushing, his palm calloused from rope and reins. "Alina Hartwell," she said, using the false surname she had chosen in Santa Fe. "Or at least, that is what I am calling myself now." She had not meant to say that last part and immediately tensed, waiting for questions or suspicion. But Cole simply nodded as if she had commented on the weather. "Lot of folks out here are calling themselves something different than what they started with. The West is good for new beginnings if you are willing to work for them. And if the old life catches up," something flickered in his eyes, old pain perhaps, or understanding born of experience, "then you deal with it when it comes. But in the meantime, you got to eat and sleep somewhere. Might as well be doing work that pays decent." He was right, of course. Alina had perhaps enough money for another 2 weeks if she was careful, and then what? She could keep running, keep moving from town to town until her funds ran out and she was left with no options at all. Or she could take this chance, this unexpected opportunity that had appeared in the form of a quiet cowboy who gentled horses and seemed to understand about running from things. "When could I meet Mr. Garrett?" she asked. Cole's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "I am heading back to the ranch this afternoon. You could ride out with me if you are willing to sit a horse, or I could ask Garrett to come into town tomorrow." The thought of being on a horse with a man she barely knew should have terrified her, would have terrified her even a few minutes ago. But Alina found herself saying, "I can ride, not expertly but adequately. Adequately is all you need. Meet me here at 2 o'clock. I will saddle you a gentle mare." Alina spent the intervening hours in a state of nervous anticipation. She changed into her most practical dress, pinned her dark blonde hair into a tight bun, and checked her derringer 3 times to make sure it was loaded. Mrs. Fletcher eyed her preparations with interest and finally asked where she was going. "A job interview at the Big Sky Ranch," Alina told her. "Do you know anything about the owner, Sam Garrett?" "Good man. Fair dealer, lost his wife to cholera about 10 years back and never remarried. Throws himself into his work, that one does." Mrs. Fletcher paused, then added, "You could do worse than working for him. He is one of the few ranchers around here who treats his people decent." It was exactly the kind of endorsement Alina had been hoping for, and it eased some of the tight anxiety in her chest. She thanked Mrs. Fletcher and walked back to the livery, arriving just before 2 to find Cole waiting with 2 horses already saddled. The mare he indicated for her was a pretty chestnut with a white blaze, calm-eyed and patient. "This is Rosie," Cole said, holding the mare steady while Alina mounted. "She is steady and smart. Trust her and she will take care of you." His own horse was a rangy dun gelding that stood quietly despite the bustle of the street. Cole swung up with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it, and then they were riding out of Copper Springs into the vast open country beyond. The land was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, all red rock and scrub brush and distant purple mountains that seemed to float in the heat haze. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Alina was grateful for the bonnet that shaded her face. They rode in silence for the first mile, Cole apparently comfortable with the quiet and Alina still not quite sure what to make of this strange turn her life had taken. Finally, she said, "You did not ask why I am using a false name." Cole glanced at her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "Figure it is your business. If you want to tell me, you will. If you do not, that is fine too. Most people would be curious or suspicious, maybe. But I have learned that everyone has their reasons for things, and most of those reasons are not my concern." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I spent 2 years in Mexico after the war, calling myself by my mother's maiden name and trying to forget what I had seen. So I understand about needing to be someone else for a while." Alina absorbed this, hearing what he did not say as clearly as what he did. "Did it work, the forgetting?" "No, but it gave me time to figure out how to live with the remembering." He pointed ahead where a cluster of buildings was becoming visible in the distance. "That is the Big Sky. Garrett built it up from nothing, starting with 100 head of cattle and more determination than good sense. Now he runs 2,000 head and supplies beef to half the mining camps in the territory." The ranch was larger than Alina had expected, with a sprawling main house, a bunkhouse, several barns and corrals, and various other outbuildings she could not immediately identify. Horses grazed in a nearby pasture, and she could see cattle dotting the hillsides beyond. Men were working at various tasks, mending fences and grooming horses and hauling supplies, and the whole place had an air of purposeful industry. Cole led her to the main house, a solid adobe structure with a covered porch and actual glass windows, a luxury in this part of the territory. He dismounted and came around to help Alina down, his hands steadying her waist briefly before releasing her the moment her feet touched ground. She appreciated that, the way he seemed to instinctively understand about not touching more than necessary, not crowding or looming. A man emerged from the house, tall and robined with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades under the desert sun. He looked Alina over with shrewd blue eyes, not judging but assessing, and she straightened her spine and met his gaze directly. "You must be the young lady Cole mentioned," the man said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. "Samuel Garrett." Cole tells me you can keep books and handle correspondence. Yes, sir. I can also manage inventories, prepare reports, and handle basic legal documents. Eleanor had learned all of this working for Marcus, back when she had thought he was offering her honest employment rather than a different kind of trap. Garrett nodded approvingly. The ranch accounts are a mess. I know cattle and land and horses, but paperwork makes my eyes cross. My last attempt at organized bookkeeping ended up as kindling for the stove. If you can make sense of it all and keep it that way, I will pay you $40 a month plus room and board. You would have your own room in the house, take your meals with me and the foreman's family. Work is 5 days a week, Saturdays and Sundays off unless something urgent comes up and I pay extra for urgent. Sound fair? It was more than fair. It was generous, almost suspiciously so. Eleanor found herself saying, "Why are you offering this to someone you do not know? I could be incompetent." Or dishonest. Garrett's expression softened into something that might have been respect. You could be. But Cole vouched for you and I trust his judgment. He has a sense about people, always has. If he thinks you are worth the chance, that is good enough for me. He paused, then added more gently, and I figure anyone who comes this far west alone is running from something or towards something, and either way, they deserve a fair shake if they are willing to work for it. Eleanor felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. I will work hard. You have my word on that. Then we have an understanding. When can you start? Tomorrow, if that suits you. They shook hands on it, and Garrett showed her to a small room at the back of the house, simply furnished but clean and private with a door that locked from the inside. Eleanor ran her fingers over the lock mechanism, feeling that familiar compulsion to test it to make sure it would hold. When she turned, she found Cole watching her from the doorway, his expression thoughtful. You will be safe here, he said quietly. Garrett's room is on the other side of the house and the bunkhouse is 50 yards away. There is a bell rope by your bed that rings in the kitchen and the foreman's house. Anyone tries anything, you pull that rope and you will have help in seconds. You thought of everything. Eleanor was not sure how to feel about that, about being so transparent in her fear. Not everything, but I have known women who had reason to be careful around men, and I figure it is better to know the precautions exist than to lie awake worrying. He tipped his hat. I will ride back to town with you now to get your things, if that suits you. Or you can wait until tomorrow and come out on the supply wagon. Eleanor looked around the small room, at the narrow bed with its clean quilts, the washstand with its pitcher and basin, the window with its view of the mountains. She thought about going back to her room at the boarding house, packing her few belongings, and returning to this place that Cole said was safe. The sensible thing would be to wait, to take the supply wagon with other people around, but she found herself saying, now would be fine. If you do not mind the trip back to town. I do not mind. They rode back to Copper Springs in the golden light of late afternoon, and Eleanor collected her carpetbag from Mrs. Fletcher, who clucked approvingly about the Big Sky Ranch and made Eleanor promise to visit when she came to town on her days off. Then they were riding back out into the open country, and Eleanor was acutely aware of the fact that she was completely alone with a man she had known for less than a day, miles from any help if she had misjudged him. But Cole simply rode in that same easy silence as before, occasionally pointing out landmarks or commenting on the livestock they passed. As the sun sank toward the horizon and the heat began to ease, Eleanor found herself relaxing despite everything, lulled by the steady rhythm of the mare's gait and the vast quiet of the land. Can I ask you something? She said finally. You can ask. I might not answer, but you can ask. Why did you help me? You do not know me. I could be exactly the kind of trouble you do not need. Cole was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Eleanor thought he might not respond. Then he said, 3 years ago, I rode into Copper Springs with a bullet in my side and a price on my head, wanted for killing a man in El Paso. The killing was a fair fight, but the dead man's family had money and influence, and they made sure I was charged with murder. Sam Garrett took me in anyway, gave me work and a place to stay while I healed. When the law finally caught up with me 6 months later, he rode with me to the territorial courthouse and testified about my character. The judge threw out the charges. Eleanor absorbed this, understanding what he was offering her. So you know about running. I know about it. And I know that sometimes the difference between making it and not making it is one person willing to give you a chance. He looked at her then, and in the fading light, his eyes were very serious. So I help when I can, simple as that. They arrived back at the ranch as full darkness settled over the land, and Cole showed Eleanor to the kitchen where Hector Morale's wife, a round, pleasant woman named Rosa, fed them both with beef stew and fresh bread. Rosa chattered comfortably about the ranch and her children and the best places to buy fabric in Copper Springs, clearly delighted to have another woman around. Eleanor found herself responding to the warmth, feeling some of her habitual guardedness slip. That night, alone in her small room, Eleanor tested the lock 4 times, placed her derringer under her pillow, and lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling into sleep. But for the first time in weeks, the fear that had been her constant companion felt less like a crushing weight and more like something she might eventually learn to set down. The next morning, Eleanor began her work in earnest. Garrett had not been exaggerating about the state of his accounts. Papers were stuffed into crates with no apparent organization, receipts mixed with correspondence, contracts folded in with grocery lists. It took her 3 days just to sort everything into categories, and another week to begin making sense of the actual numbers. But Eleanor discovered she enjoyed the work. There was something satisfying about bringing order to chaos, about watching neat columns of figures take shape on the ledger pages. Garrett checked on her progress periodically, nodding approvingly at her organizational system, and Rosa brought her lunch and made sure she remembered to eat. Cole she saw in passing, usually in the early morning or evening when the hands were coming and going from their work. He always acknowledged her with a nod or a brief greeting, nothing more, but Eleanor found herself watching for him anyway, marking his presence with something that might have been anticipation. 2 weeks into her employment, Eleanor was working on the accounts when she heard a commotion from outside. She looked out the window to see a group of riders approaching, perhaps a dozen men, well-armed and wearing the look of trouble. Her heart jumped into her throat and her hand went instinctively to the derringer in her skirt pocket. Garrett appeared in the doorway of her workroom. "Stay inside," he said quietly. "Probably nothing, but better safe than sorry." Eleanor watched from the window as Garrett went out to meet the riders, Cole and several other ranch hands flanking him. The conversation was too distant for her to hear, but she could read the tension in the way the men sat their horses and the hands that rested on gun butts. Then one of the riders dismounted and pulled a paper from his saddlebag, unfolding it to show Garrett. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the shape of it, could recognize the format. A wanted poster. Her breath stopped in her chest. But Garrett barely glanced at it, shaking his head and saying something that made the rider's jaw tighten. The conversation continued for several more minutes, growing heated, until finally Cole said something that made the other men in the group shift uneasily. Whatever he said, it seemed to decide matters. The riders mounted up and rode out, kicking up dust as they went. Eleanor was still standing at the window, her knuckles white on the derringer, when Garrett and Cole came back inside. Garrett looked at her kindly but directly. "They are looking for a woman wanted for murder in Denver. Name of Eleanor Morrison, though they say she might be using an alias. Said she killed a banker named Marcus Thornton." Eleanor could not speak, could not move. This was it, the moment where her brief respite ended and the running started again. She waited for Garrett to tell her to pack her things, or worse, to tell her he would be holding her for the law. Instead, Garrett said, "I told them no woman matching that description works here, and if they did not have a warrant, they needed to move along." Cole persuaded them it would be healthier to do so. Eleanor's legs felt weak. She sat down heavily in her desk chair. The poster. It must have my description. It did. Dark blonde hair, green eyes, about 23 years old, medium height, described you well enough. Garrett pulled up a chair and sat down facing her. Thing is, the woman I employ has light brown hair, gray eyes, and is at least 25. Funny how the light can play tricks on a person's memory. It took Alina a moment to understand what he was saying. He was giving her a different description, one that would not match the poster, protecting her. She looked at Cole, who stood near the door, his expression unreadable. Why? She whispered. Cole met her eyes. Because any man who ends up dead at the hands of a woman half his size probably earned it, and because we figure you deserve to tell your own story in your own time. Alina felt hot tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, unused to this kind of casual acceptance, this matter-of-fact protection. He was going to kill me. Marcus, I did not plan it. I did not want to do it. But he was hurting me, had been hurting me for months, and that night he said he was going to make sure I never left him. I just wanted him to stop. Garrett nodded slowly. The law does not always see the difference between killing and surviving. Especially not when it is a woman standing up to a man. He stood, patting her shoulder awkwardly. You do good work, Alina. I do not care what name you were born with. As far as I am concerned, you are exactly who you say you are. After he left, Cole lingered in the doorway. Those men might come back. They were bounty hunters looking for the reward money. If they do, we will handle it. But you should know the situation. Alina nodded, still feeling shaken. Thank you, for what you said to them, for making them leave. I just pointed out that trespassing on private land looking for someone who is not here is a good way to find trouble they are not being paid for. Cole's mouth quirked slightly. They decided the reward was not worth the risk. Still, thank you. He studied her for a long moment, and Alina had the sense he was weighing his words carefully. Finally, he said, You are safe here. I meant that. Whatever you are running from, whatever happened before, you have people here who will stand with you. You do not have to be afraid all the time. I have been afraid for so long I do not know how to stop, Alina admitted. The words came out before she could stop them, more honest than she had intended. Cole's expression softened. Fear is a hard habit to break, but maybe you could try trusting a little, see how that feels. After he left, Alina sat at her desk for a long time, staring at the neat columns of numbers without seeing them. Trust. The word felt foreign, dangerous. She had trusted Marcus when he offered her a job, trusted him when he said he only wanted to help her, trusted him right up until the first time his hand connected with her face, and she realized the trap she had walked into. But Garrett and Cole and even Rosa had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. They had protected her without asking for anything in return. Perhaps, she thought tentatively, perhaps this could be a place where she could stop running. Where she could start to build something that resembled a life. The days settled into a rhythm. Alina worked on the accounts, bringing order to years of neglect. She took her meals with Garrett and Rosa's family, learning the names and personalities of the ranch hands. She began to venture out of the house more, walking to the corrals to watch the men work with the horses, visiting Rosa to learn how to make tortillas and menudo, and she found herself increasingly aware of Cole's presence. The way he moved through the ranch with quiet confidence. The gentle patience he showed with the difficult horses. The respect with which he treated everyone from Garrett down to the youngest stable boy. She watched him work, admiring the lean strength of him, the competence that needed no boasting. One evening, perhaps 6 weeks after she had arrived at the ranch, Alina walked out to the largest corral where Cole was working with a young stallion, teaching it to accept a saddle. The horse was nervous, dancing sideways and rolling its eyes, but Cole just kept talking in that low, steady voice, working through the animal's fear with infinite patience. Alina leaned on the fence rail, watching. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and crimson, and in that light, Cole looked like something out of a story, romantic and heroic. The thought surprised her. She had believed Marcus had killed any capacity she had for attraction, had convinced her that the flutter of interest was just the first step toward another trap. But this felt different, safer, though she barely dared admit it even to herself. Cole finally got the saddle onto the stallion's back, praising the horse lavishly and feeding it an apple from his pocket. Then he turned and saw Alina watching. He smiled, a real smile that lit up his whole face, and Alina felt her breath catch. "How long have you been there?" he asked, walking over to the fence. "Long enough to see you win him over. You are good at that. Practice. I have gentled a lot of horses." He leaned against the fence beside her, close enough that she could smell horse and leather and clean sweat. "You settling in all right? No more trouble from those bounty hunters?" "No more trouble, and yes, I think I am settling in." Alina hesitated, then added, "I have not thanked you properly for everything you have done." Cole shrugged, looking embarrassed. "Just being decent, nothing special. It is special to me." She looked at him, at the strong lines of his profile in the fading light. "I have never felt safe with any man before." The words hung in the air between them, more revealing than she had intended. Cole turned to face her fully, his expression serious and intent. "You will with me," he said quietly. "Always. I promise you that, Alina. You are safe with me." Something in her chest cracked open at those words, at the absolute certainty in his voice. Alina had been holding herself together with will and fear for so long, and suddenly the weight of it was too much. Tears spilled over before she could stop them, and she covered her face with her hands, mortified. "Hey," Cole said softly. "Hey, it is all right." She felt his hand, tentative and gentle on her shoulder, not pulling or grabbing, just resting there with careful respect. The simple kindness of it made her cry harder. "I am sorry," she managed between sobs. "I do not usually do this. Nothing to apologize for. Cry as much as you need." So she did, and Cole just stood there with his hand on her shoulder, steady and solid and safe. When the tears finally subsided, Alina wiped her eyes with her sleeve and tried to pull herself together. "I must look a mess. You look fine." Cole reached into his pocket and produced a relatively clean handkerchief. "Here." Alina took it, dabbing at her face. "I do not know what came over me. You have been holding a lot inside for a long time. Eventually it has to come out." He paused, then said, "You do not have to hold it all alone anymore. You know that, right?" Alina looked up at him, at the genuine concern in his creekwater eyes. "I am starting to believe it might be true." They stood there as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear. Alina felt something shifting in her chest, some long-frozen part of her beginning to thaw. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Over the following weeks, she and Cole began spending more time together. He showed her the ranch, taking her riding through the grazing lands, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the cattle drives and the characters he had met. She told him about her life before Marcus, about her parents and her brief, happy childhood, about her love of books and numbers. She did not talk about Marcus much, but Cole seemed to understand anyway. He never pushed, never pried. Just listened when she needed to talk and provided steady companionship when words felt like too much. Alina found herself looking forward to their time together, found herself watching for him during the day and timing her evening walks to coincide with when he finished his work. The fear that had been her constant companion was still there, but it was quieter now, less insistent. And underneath it, something new was growing, something that felt like hope. One Saturday, Cole asked if she would like to ride into town with him. He needed to pick up supplies, and Alina realized with a start that she had not left the ranch in nearly 2 months. The thought of Copper Springs, with its saloons and crowds and the possibility of bounty hunters, made her anxious. But Cole said it so casually, so clearly expecting she would be fine, that Alina found herself agreeing. They rode in side by side, and Cole kept up a steady stream of conversation that Alina suspected was designed to keep her from worrying. It worked better than it probably should have. By the time they reached town, she felt more excited than afraid. Copper Springs on a Saturday was busy and loud. full of miners spending their wages and ranch hands enjoying their day off. Alina stayed close to Cole as they made their way to the general store, acutely aware of the eyes that followed them. But Cole had a way of moving through crowds that somehow created space, and the way he kept a casual but protective presence at her side made her feel secure. At the store, while Cole discussed supplies with the proprietor, Alina wandered the aisles looking at fabrics and ribbons and all the small luxuries she had been denying herself. She was admiring a length of green calico when Cole appeared at her elbow. "That would look good on you," he said. "Match your eyes." Alina felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I do not need a new dress." "Maybe not need, but one is all right too." He picked up the bolt of fabric. "Consider it a bonus for doing such good work with the accounts." "Cole, you cannot buy me fabric." "Sure I can. I am doing it right now." He carried the fabric to the counter before she could protest further, adding it to the pile of ranch supplies along with thread and buttons and a paper of pins. Alina did not know whether to be exasperated or touched. She settled for both, shaking her head as Cole paid for everything and arranged for the supplies to be delivered to the ranch. Then they were back out on the street, and Cole said, "You hungry? The restaurant makes decent steak." They ate lunch in the small restaurant, sitting by the window where Alina could watch the street. The food was good and the conversation easy, and Alina realized with a start that she was having a wonderful time. This was what normal people did, she thought. They went to town and bought supplies and ate lunch, and it was ordinary and pleasant and utterly remarkable. As they were finishing their meal, a woman approached their table. She was perhaps 40, well-dressed in a way that suggested money, and her expression when she looked at Alina was cold and assessing. "You are the woman staying at the Big Sky," the woman said. It was not a question. Alina felt her shoulders tense. "I work there, yes." "Living out there alone with all those men. People are talking, you know, saying it is not proper." Before Alina could respond, Cole stood. His voice was still quiet, still polite, but there was steel underneath it. "Mrs. Henderson, Miss Hartwell's living arrangements are her own business and certainly none of yours. If people are talking, maybe you should encourage them to find more productive uses for their time." Mrs. Henderson's face flushed. "Well, I never. Maybe you should start." Cole put money on the table to cover their meal and held out his hand to Alina. "We should get going." Alina took his hand and let him guide her out of the restaurant, her heart pounding. Once they were outside, she said, "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did. Nobody gets to make you feel small for earning an honest living." He was still holding her hand, and he squeezed it gently. "Besides, Mrs. Henderson is a busybody who has been making people miserable with her judgments for 20 years. It was about time someone called her on it." Alina looked down at their joined hands, at the way her smaller fingers fit between his larger ones. Cole followed her gaze and seemed to realize he was still holding her hand. He started to pull away, but Alina tightened her grip, keeping him there. "Thank you," she said, "for defending me." "For the fabric, for everything." Cole's expression softened. "Alina, you do not need to keep thanking me. I do this because I want to, because you matter to me." The words settled between them, weighted with meaning. Alina felt her pulse quicken, felt that flutter of possibility that both excited and terrified her. "I matter to you." "Yes," Cole said it simply, as if it were obvious. "You have mattered to me since that first day in town, if I am being honest. When you were watching me with that horse and I saw that you understood about fear and gentleness both." Alina's throat felt tight. "Cole, I do not know if I can be what you might want. After Marcus, after everything, I am not sure I know how to be with someone, to trust like that. I am not asking you to be anything except yourself, and I am not Marcus. I would never hurt you, Alina. Never." He cupped her face gently with his free hand, giving her plenty of time to pull away. When she did not, he brushed his thumb across her cheekbone. "I would like to court you proper if you will let me. No pressure, no expectations, just spend time together and see where it goes." Alina felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different, not grief or fear but something that might have been joy. "I would like that," she whispered. Cole's smile was like sunrise. He leaned down slowly, telegraphing his intention clearly, and pressed the softest kiss to her forehead. "Then we will take it slow and figure it out together." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, and Alina felt as if she was floating. The future that had seemed so dark and impossible was suddenly full of light. She had a job, a safe place to live, and now this. A man who saw her fear and met it with patience, who promised safety and seemed to actually mean it. Over the next months, Cole courted her with a gentleness that made her want to cry. He brought her wildflowers from the hills. He taught her to rope and to shoot properly, giving her skills that made her feel more capable and less helpless. He sat with her in the evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, content just to be in her presence. And slowly, carefully, Alina learned to trust him. She learned that when he promised to be somewhere, he showed up. When he said he would do something, he did it. When she woke from nightmares about Marcus, Cole was there with quiet comfort, never pushing for more than she could give. She learned, too, that she was capable of more than fear. That her heart, which she thought Marcus had broken beyond repair, could still beat faster at the sight of Cole's smile. That she could want to be touched, to be held, as long as it was Cole doing the touching and holding. Their first real kiss happened on a cool November evening, 3 months after that day in town. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and Alina turned to say something and found Cole looking at her with such open affection that it stole her breath. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking about how lucky I am, that you took a chance on coming here, on letting me know you." Alina leaned closer, her heart racing but not with fear. "Can I tell you something? Anything?" "I think I might be falling in love with you," Cole's breath caught. "Might be," Alina smiled, feeling braver than she had in years. "Am definitely falling in love with you. Have been for a while now, if I am honest." "Alina," he said her name like a prayer. "I have been in love with you since you agreed to ride out to the ranch with me that first day, probably before that, if I am being truthful. From the moment I saw you standing in the street, looking like you were ready to fight the whole world. I was terrified. I know, but you were brave anyway. That is what matters." Alina closed the last distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft and sweet, and when Cole pulled her closer, she went willingly, trusting him to keep the promise he had made. That she would always be safe with him. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast and we can wait as long as you need, but Alina, I want to spend my life with you. I want to build something real and good and safe, where you never have to be afraid again." Alina felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They wed in January of 1879 in a simple ceremony at the ranch with Garrett and Rosa's family as witnesses. Alina wore a dress she had made from the green calico Cole had bought her, and Cole wore a new shirt and actually combed his hair. Garrett gave her away, and Rosa cried happy tears through the entire ceremony. That night, in the small house Cole had built for them on the edge of the ranch property, Alina discovered that intimacy could be gentle and joyful rather than frightening. Cole took his time, checking in with her constantly, making sure she felt safe and cherished. And when she finally fell asleep in his arms, it was the first time in years she had slept through the night without nightmares. The bounty hunters came back once, about 6 months after the wedding. Cole met them at the property line with a rifle and several other armed ranch hands, and made it very clear that they were not welcome. After that, they did not return. Alina's suspected word had spread that the Big Sky was not a good place to look for easy reward money. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Alina continued to manage the ranch accounts, proving invaluable as Garrett expanded his operations. Cole worked his way up to head wrangler, gaining a reputation throughout the territory for his skill with horses. They built their life together, piece by careful piece, learning each other's rhythms and quirks and building something that felt like permanence. In the spring of 1880, Alina realized she was pregnant. The discovery brought complicated emotions. She was thrilled and terrified in equal measure, worried that she would not know how to be a mother, that her fear would somehow damage her child. But Cole held her and promised they would figure it out together, just like they had figured out everything else. Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with Cole's dark hair and Alina's green eyes. They named him Samuel, after Garrett, who had given them both a chance when they needed it most. Holding him for the first time, Alina felt something fundamental shift in her heart. This child would never know fear the way she had. She would make sure of it. As Sam grew, 2 more children followed, a daughter named Rose in 1882 and another son named James in 1884. The little house Cole had built got added onto, growing with their family. Alina watched her children run free across the ranch lands, watched Cole teach them to ride and rope and be kind to animals, and felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. Garrett aged into his 70s, eventually ceding more and more control of the ranch to Cole, who proved as capable a manager as he was a horseman. When Garrett passed peacefully in his sleep in 1890, he left the big sky to Cole and Alina, acknowledging in his will that they had made it what it was through their hard work and dedication. Alina stood at Garrett's grave and cried for the man who had given her a chance when she had been desperate and running. Cole held her as she grieved, and their children stood solemn and respectful, understanding they were saying goodbye to someone important. The years rolled on, bringing challenges and triumphs both. There were droughts that tested their resourcefulness and good years that brought prosperity. There were family celebrations and quiet moments of everyday contentment. Alina's nightmares about Marcus faded gradually until whole months would pass without her thinking of him at all. She kept her derringer in a drawer, no longer needing it under her pillow. The lock on their bedroom door stayed unlocked. She had learned, finally, what it meant to feel truly safe. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Cole took Alina riding up into the hills above the ranch. They left their 3 children, now grown or nearly so, in charge of the evening chores and rode out just the 2 of them as the sun began to set. They stopped at a high point where they could see the ranch spread out below, the house and barns and corrals, the cattle grazing peacefully, the whole enterprise they had built together. Cole dismounted and helped Alina down, and they stood looking out over it all. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked. "Coming here, staying?" Alina turned to look at him, this man who had kept his promise every single day for 2 decades. His hair was threaded with gray now, lines etched around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but he was still the same person who had gentled a frightened horse and offered kindness to a terrified woman. "Never," she said. "Not for a single moment. You gave me my life back, Cole. More than that, you gave me a life worth living." "We gave that to each other," Cole corrected gently. He pulled her close, and Alina went gladly into his arms, still feeling that same flutter of joy she had felt all those years ago. "I love you, Alina Bennett. Have loved you from the start. Will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that." "I love you too," Alina whispered against his chest. "You promised I would always be safe with you, and you have kept that promise every day. You are the best man I have ever known." They stood there as the sun set in a blaze of crimson and gold. 2 people who had found each other in the harsh landscape of the frontier and built something beautiful despite everything working against them. Below them, smoke rose from the chimney of their home where their children waited. Around them, the land stretched vast and timeless. Alina thought about the terrified woman she had been, stepping off that stagecoach with a hidden gun and a false name. She thought about all the fear and running and desperate hopelessness that had brought her to Copper Springs. And she thought about everything that had come after, all the love and safety and bone-deep contentment. "Thank you," she said to Cole, "for seeing me that day, for helping when you did not have to, for being patient while I learned to trust, for keeping your promise." Cole kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me, for being brave enough to stay, for building this life with me." They rode back down to the ranch as the stars began to appear, hand in hand as they had been that first day. Their children greeted them at the door, Sam already married with a baby on the way, Rose courting a neighboring rancher's son, and James still finding his way but full of potential. That night, Alina and Cole sat on their porch as they had done countless times before, watching the moon rise over the mountains. Cole held her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her palm. Alina leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling utterly at peace. "I was thinking," Cole said, "maybe when Sam's baby comes, we should teach them about horses right from the start, get them comfortable in the saddle early." Alina smiled. "Already planning to spoil your grandchild? Absolutely, that is what grandparents are for." He paused, then added more seriously, "I want them to grow up knowing what we built here, understanding that good things can come from hard beginnings, that kindness matters, that keeping promises matters." "They will know," Alina assured him. "We will make sure they know." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the horses moving in the corral, the distant call of a coyote, the soft murmur of conversation from the bunkhouse where the hired hands were settling in for the night. Everything was familiar and right. Alina thought about writing to tell someone about her life, about how completely everything had changed since that desperate day in Denver. But there was no one left from that old life who would care or understand. That Alina Morrison was gone, had been gone for years. In her place was Alina Bennett, wife and mother and ranch manager, a woman who had learned that healing was possible and that safety was more than just the absence of threat. The years continued their steady march. Sam's daughter was born, then 2 more grandchildren from Rose, and eventually 3 from James. The ranch prospered under Cole's management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Alina watched Arizona achieve statehood in 1912, marveling at how much had changed since she first arrived in this wild place. She and Cole grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their share of sorrows, burying friends and weathering the storms that life inevitably brought. But through it all, they had each other, and that made everything bearable. On a warm evening in 1925, nearly 50 years after they had first met, Alina sat on their porch with Cole, surrounded by children and grandchildren gathered for a family celebration. Sam's daughter, now grown with children of her own, asked Alina to tell the story of how she and Cole had met. Alina looked at Cole, and he smiled at her with all the love and warmth he always had. "Your grandfather saved my life," Alina said simply. "Not by doing anything dramatic or heroic, but by being kind when I desperately needed kindness, by being patient when I needed time. By keeping the promises he made. I told her she would always be safe with me," Cole added, his voice rougher now with age but still steady, "and I have spent every day since trying to make sure that was true." "It has been true," Alina assured him, taking his hand. "Every single day." Their youngest great-grandchild, a little girl of perhaps 5, looked up at Alina with solemn eyes. "Were you very scared before you met great-grandpa?" Alina considered the question carefully. "Yes, I was very scared. But your great-grandfather taught me that being scared was okay as long as you did not let it stop you from living. He taught me to be brave." "You taught yourself to be brave," Cole corrected. "I just gave you a safe place to do it." That night, after the family had dispersed and it was just the 2 of them again, Cole and Alina sat under the stars as they had done thousands of times before. Cole's hand was gnarled with arthritis now. Alina's hair was white, but they still fit together the same way they always had. "No regrets?" Cole asked, echoing the question he had posed on their 20th anniversary. "Not a single one," Alina replied. "You kept your promise, Cole Bennett. Every day for nearly 50 years you kept your promise. I have been safe with you always." "And I have been loved by you always," Cole said. "That is more than I ever dreamed possible." They sat together until the moon rose high, 2 people who had found each other in a hard place and made something beautiful. The big sky ranch stretched around them, testament to what they had built together. Their family slept peacefully in various houses scattered across the property, carrying forward the legacy of kindness and promise-keeping that Cole and Alina had established. When they finally went inside, Cole locked the door behind them out of habit, and Alina realized with a start that she could not remember the last time she had checked the lock compulsively. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped needing that particular reassurance. She was safe. She had been safe for so long that it had become her natural state rather than something to be constantly verified. In their bedroom, Cole helped her with the buttons on her dress that her arthritic fingers struggled with now, and she helped him with his boots. They moved around each other with the practiced ease of 5 decades together, knowing without words where the other would be and what they would need. "I love you," Alina said as they settled into bed, the same words she had said thousands of times but which never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Cole replied. "Always have. Always will." Alina fell asleep in his arms, feeling completely safe, completely loved, completely at peace. Outside, the desert night was full of stars, and the ranch that had been their sanctuary and their life's work rested quiet under the moon. Everything was exactly as it should be. In the morning, they would wake and begin another day together. There would be work to do and family to visit, and the endless small pleasures of a life well lived. But for now, there was just this moment, this perfect contentment, this absolute fulfillment of a promise made so long ago by a quiet cowboy to a frightened woman. "You will always be safe with me," and he had been right. Alina had been safe with Cole Bennett from that very first day, and she would remain safe with him until the end of their days. It was the greatest gift she had ever been given, that safety, that steady, unwavering love. It had allowed her to heal, to grow, to become the person she was meant to be all along. The story that had begun with terror and running had ended with love and homecoming. The woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in 1878 with a hidden gun and a false name had found something she never expected in the dusty streets of Copper Springs. A man who would keep his promises, a place where she could build a life, and the peace that comes from finally being able to set down your fear and simply live. It was more than enough. It was everything,